The morning sun cast long shadows across the Rocky Mountain National Park as David Mitchell and Sarah Chen prepared for what would become one of America's most puzzling disappearances. On July 15, 1999, the young couple from Denver checked in at the Backcountry Permits office in Estes Park, Colorado, their faces bright with excitement for a 5-day solo hiking adventure through some of the most remote wilderness in the continental United States. David, 28, was a software engineer at a tech startup in downtown Denver, while Sarah, 26, worked as a wildlife biologist for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department. Both were experienced hikers who had spent countless weekends exploring Colorado's mountain ranges, but this trip to the remote Mummy Range was to be their most challenging yet, a celebration of their recent engagement and a test of their survival skills before their planned wedding in the fall. "We're planning to take the Black Canyon Trail up to Mirror Lake, then cross over to the Hague Creek drainage," David explained to Ranger Patricia Stone as she reviewed their permit application. "We've got 5 days of food and all the gear we need. Should be back by Friday evening, July 23rd, Sarah added with a confident smile. "We've done this route before in day hikes. This time, we want to really explore the backcountry, maybe do some wildlife photography. I'm hoping to document some of the elk behavior in the higher elevations." Ranger Stone, a 15-year veteran of the Park Service, was impressed by the couple's preparation. Their backpacks were properly loaded with appropriate gear. They carried detailed topographic maps, and both wore quality hiking boots that showed the wear of experienced outdoors enthusiasts. Their emergency contact information listed David's parents in Denver and Sarah's sister in Fort Collins. "Weather forecast looks good for the next few days," Stone told them as she stamped their backcountry permit. "Just remember, afternoon thunderstorms can roll in quickly above tree line. If you see lightning, get below 11,000 feet as fast as you can." The couple nodded knowingly. Colorado's high-altitude lightning strikes were legendary among hikers, and both had experienced the terrifying crack of close thunder during previous mountain adventures. At 9:17 a.m., on that clear Thursday morning, David and Sarah shouldered their packs and began their hike from the Lawn Lake trailhead. The trail started gently through aspen groves and pine forests, but would eventually climb over 3,000 vertical feet to reach the alpine tundra, where they planned to establish their base camp. Fellow hikers who encountered the couple during their first day described them as cheerful and well-prepared. Tom Bradley, a local climber who passed them near the Ypsilon Lake Junction around 2 p.m., remembered their enthusiasm clearly. They were sitting by the lake, eating lunch and studying their map, Bradley would later tell investigators. The woman, Sarah, was taking pictures of some marmots with a really nice camera setup. They seemed like they knew exactly what they were doing out there. Bradley was the last person to report seeing David and Sarah alive. The couple's planned route would take them through some of the most isolated terrain in Rocky Mountain National Park. The Mummy Range, named for the distinctive shape of its peaks, attracted fewer hikers than the popular areas around Bear Lake and Trail Ridge Road. Once beyond Ypsilon Lake, they would be entering true wilderness where human contact was rare and cell phone coverage was non-existent. Their first night's campsite was planned for the upper reaches of Hague Creek at approximately 10,800 feet elevation. From there, they intended to explore the remote basins and cirques that few visitors ever see, documenting wildlife and enjoying the solitude that drew them to the mountains. David's hiking journal, which was never found, reportedly contained detailed plans for their route, including GPS coordinates and contingency plans for weather delays. Sarah had brought professional-grade camera equipment to document their adventure, hoping to submit some photos to wildlife magazines upon their return. When Friday, July 23rd, passed without the couple checking out or contacting their families, concern began to grow. David's parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, had expected a call that evening to confirm their safe return. When Saturday morning arrived with no word, Robert called the park's emergency services. "This isn't like David," Robert told Ranger Stone during an increasingly worried phone conversation on July 24th. "He's never been late for anything in his life. If he said they'd be back Friday, something's wrong." Sarah's sister, Dr. Lisa Chen, an emergency room physician in Fort Collins, expressed similar concerns. "Sarah knows how dangerous the mountains can be. She would never make us worry unnecessarily. She always calls when she says she will." By Saturday afternoon, Park Superintendent Michael Torres had authorized the initiation of a search and rescue operation. The Rocky Mountain National Park Search and Rescue Team, one of the most experienced mountain rescue units in the country, began mobilizing for what they hoped would be a routine, overdue hiker situation. Search team leader Jake Morrison, a former Army Ranger who had conducted hundreds of wilderness rescues, assembled a team of 12 experienced searchers, including technical rock climbers, wilderness medics, and tracking specialists. They planned to follow the couple's intended route, checking known camping areas and water sources where hikers typically stopped. "In most cases like this, we find people within 24 hours, Morrison told the families during a briefing on Sunday morning, July 25th. "They get delayed by weather, take a wrong turn, or have minor equipment failure. The fact that they're experienced hikers actually works in our favor. They're likely to stay put and wait for help, rather than try to self-rescue." The initial search focused on the area around Hague Creek and Mirror Lake, where the couple had planned to spend most of their time. Searchers found several old campsites with scattered gear from previous visitors, but nothing that could definitively be linked to David and Sarah. On Monday, July 26th, the search expanded to include helicopter reconnaissance. Pilot Steve Rodriguez flew systematic grid patterns over the entire Mummy Range, looking for brightly colored camping gear, signal fires, or any signs of human activity in the vast wilderness below. "From the air, you can see things that ground teams miss," Rodriguez explained to Incident Commander Torres. "A flash of color from a tent, smoke from a signal fire, even bodies lying in the open. But this terrain is so broken up, with so many hidden valleys and cliff bands, that someone could be within 100 yards of the flight path and still be invisible." The helicopter search revealed the challenging nature of the terrain. The Mummy Range was characterized by steep-walled cirques, extensive talus fields, and thick forests that could easily conceal a small campsite. Unlike the popular areas of the park where trails were well-defined and camping areas were established, this wilderness area offered countless places where hikers could set up camp or become lost. By Tuesday, July 27th, nearly 50 search and rescue personnel were combing the mountains. Teams included specialists from Larimer County Search and Rescue, the Alpine Rescue Team, and volunteers from local climbing clubs. They used techniques ranging from hasty teams that could cover large areas quickly to fine grid searches that examined every square foot of likely terrain. Dog teams were brought in to follow scent trails, but the dry conditions and multiple days since the couple's passage made tracking extremely difficult. The search dogs could detect human scent in certain areas, but the trails invariably led to dead ends or became too faint to follow. "We're covering an area of about 30 square miles," Morrison updated the families on Wednesday. "That's roughly the size of San Francisco, but it's vertical terrain with visibility limited by trees and topography. We're being systematic, but it's going to take time." The weather during the search operation was generally favorable, with afternoon thunderstorms but no major storm systems. This worked against the theory that the couple had been trapped by severe weather, which was often a factor in mountain emergencies. As the search entered its second week, investigators began exploring alternative theories about what might have happened to David and Sarah. The possibility of a climbing accident was considered, although the couple's route didn't include technical climbing that would require ropes or specialized equipment. They could have attempted to climb one of the peaks and fallen, suggested Dr. James Patterson, a local climbing guide who joined the search effort. Long's Peak and Mount Ypsilon both have routes that look easier than they actually are. Even experienced hikers sometimes get in over their heads. However, searches of the major peaks in the area found no evidence of climbing attempts or accidents. The rock faces were carefully examined with binoculars and telescopes, and technical rescue teams rappelled down the most likely cliff areas where bodies might have fallen. Another theory involved the possibility that the couple had become lost and wandered outside the park boundaries into the adjacent Roosevelt National Forest or private land. This would significantly expand the search area and complicate rescue efforts. If they took a wrong turn at any of several trail junctions, they could have ended up miles from where we're searching, explained Forest Service Liaison Officer Margaret Kelly. The drainage systems all connect, and it's possible to walk for days in the wrong direction before realizing you're lost. Ground teams expanded their search to include areas outside the park, coordinating with the U.S., Forest Service, and private landowners. This extension of the search area brought in additional volunteers, but also highlighted the enormity of the wilderness involved. By Friday, August 6th, 3 weeks after David and Sarah had failed to return, the active search was scaled back to a monitoring status. More than 300 people had participated in what became one of the largest search operations in Colorado mountain history. They had covered over 100 square miles of wilderness, checked every known trail and camping area, and investigated dozens of tips and possible sightings. "We've done everything that current technology and human resources allow," Superintendent Torres announced during a press conference. "The search will remain active, and we'll investigate any new information that comes to light. But we have to acknowledge that we haven't found any trace of David Mitchell or Sarah Chen." The families were devastated, but not ready to give up hope. Robert Mitchell organized private search efforts that continued sporadically through the fall of 1999, bringing in additional volunteers and even hiring a private investigator who specialized in missing persons cases. "I'm not going to stop looking for my son," Robert declared to local media. "David and Sarah are out there somewhere, and I'm going to find them." The case attracted national attention when it was featured on several missing persons television programs. The story of two young, experienced hikers who had simply vanished in well-traveled mountains captured public imagination and prompted hundreds of tips and reported sightings. Most of the tips proved to be cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking, but each one was carefully investigated by park rangers and local law enforcement. Reported sightings came from as far away as New Mexico and Montana, suggesting that some people hoped the couple had survived and were living under assumed identities. As winter approached and snow began to accumulate in the high country, the possibility of finding David and Sarah alive became increasingly remote. The mountain environment above 10,000 feet was brutally unforgiving in winter, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snow depths that could bury any evidence of their presence. If they're still in the mountains, they're not going to survive a Colorado winter without proper shelter and supplies, Morrison explained to the families during a difficult meeting in October 1999. "We have to start considering the possibility that they're no longer alive." The official search was suspended for the winter months, but was scheduled to resume in late spring 2000, when snow melted enough to allow access to the high country. This gave the families several months of agonizing waiting, while hoping that the spring thaw might reveal clues that had been hidden by early snows. During the winter hiatus, investigators focused on other aspects of the case. They reviewed the couple's personal lives, looking for any indication that the disappearance might have been voluntary. Financial records were examined for large cash withdrawals or unusual transactions. Friends and co-workers were interviewed about the couple's state of mind and relationship. The investigation revealed a couple who were deeply in love and looking forward to their future together. David had recently received a promotion at work and was excited about the financial security it would bring. Sarah was passionate about her conservation work and had been accepted into a graduate program that would advance her career. There was absolutely nothing in their lives that would suggest they wanted to disappear, concluded Detective Mike Stevens of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, who had been assigned to coordinate with park investigators. These were people who had everything to live for. Friends described David as methodical and safety-conscious, someone who researched every aspect of a hiking trip before setting out. Sarah was known for her deep knowledge of mountain ecosystems and her ability to navigate in challenging terrain. David would plan a trip to the grocery store, joked his college roommate during an interview. He wasn't the kind of person who would take unnecessary risks or venture into unknown territory without proper preparation. When the search resumed in May 2000, investigators brought new technology and fresh perspectives to the case. Ground-penetrating radar was used to check areas where the couple might have been buried by avalanche or rockfall. Metal detectors were employed to locate buried camping gear or personal items. The spring search also benefited from better weather and improved visibility as snow melted to reveal terrain that had been inaccessible during the previous summer. Water levels in streams and lakes were lower, exposing shoreline areas that might contain evidence. However, the 2000 search season produced no more clues than the original effort. Searchers found plenty of evidence of other hikers and campers, old fire rings, scattered gear, and established campsites, but nothing that could be linked to David and Sarah. "It's like they just evaporated," Morrison told reporters after suspending the 2000 search effort in September. "In 20 years of search and rescue work, I've never seen anything like it. Two people don't just disappear without leaving some kind of trace." The case began to generate theories that went beyond conventional explanations. Some suggested that the couple had been victims of foul play, possibly murdered by someone they encountered in the wilderness. Others proposed that they had fallen into one of the many caves or crevasses that honeycombed the limestone formations in parts of the range. There are places in these mountains where you could drop a school bus and never find it, observed veteran climber and searcher Paul Richardson. Deep, snow-filled gullies, hidden caves, cliff bands where a fall would put you completely out of sight. The mountains are good at keeping their secrets. A few investigators considered the possibility of abduction by persons unknown, though this seemed unlikely given the remote location and the logistical challenges of removing two people and their gear from the wilderness without being seen. As the years passed, the case of David Mitchell and Sarah Chen joined the ranks of America's most puzzling disappearances. Park rangers continued to keep an eye out for any trace of the couple during their regular patrols, and the case file remained active with both the National Park Service and local law enforcement. The families never stopped hoping for answers, even as the practical prospects for finding David and Sarah alive diminished. Annual memorial services were held at the Lawn Lake Trailhead, where friends and family gathered to remember the couple and maintain hope that someday the mystery would be solved. "We just want to know what happened," Linda Mitchell said during the 5th anniversary memorial service in 2004. "Not knowing is the hardest part. We can't grieve properly. We can't move on because there's always that small hope that they're still out there somewhere." The case inspired changes in backcountry safety protocols, including requirements for more detailed trip plans and recommendations for satellite communication devices in remote areas. The Park Service also improved its search and rescue capabilities, adding new technology and training programs. But for all the advances in search technology and wilderness safety, the fundamental mystery remained. How do two experienced hikers simply vanish without a trace in well-traveled mountains? The question haunted search and rescue professionals and captured the imagination of outdoor enthusiasts across the country. In 2010, 11 years after the disappearance, the case was featured in a documentary about unsolved wilderness mysteries. The filmmakers brought new attention to David and Sarah's story, but also highlighted how little progress had been made despite extensive investigation. "This case represents every searcher's nightmare," Morrison said in an interview for the documentary. "We had good weather, unlimited resources, experienced teams, and we still came up empty. It makes you question everything you think you know about search and rescue." Indeed, as the 20th anniversary of the disappearance approached in 2019, park officials announced that new technology might offer fresh hope for solving the case. Advanced satellite imagery, drone surveillance, and ground-penetrating radar had all improved dramatically since the original search. Technology that didn't exist in 1999 might finally give us the tools we need to find out what happened to David and Sarah, announced current Park Superintendent Rebecca Martinez during a press conference marking the anniversary. However, despite periodic renewed search efforts using new technology, the mountains continued to guard their secret. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved, a reminder of how vast and unforgiving the wilderness could be. What no one could have predicted was that the answer would finally come from an unexpected source in an unexpected place after 25 years of silence. The Rocky Mountains had indeed been keeping a secret, but not the kind anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Walsh of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office opened the dusty file cabinet in the basement of the courthouse on the morning of March 12, 2019, exactly 20 years after taking over the Mitchell Chen case from her predecessor. The manila folders were thick with reports, photographs, and interview transcripts that represented 2 decades of frustrated investigation into one of Colorado's most perplexing missing persons cases. Walsh had been a rookie deputy when David Mitchell and Sarah Chen disappeared, but she had followed the case closely throughout her career, eventually specializing in cold case investigations. Now, as a seasoned detective with 15 years of experience, she was determined to apply modern investigative techniques to the mystery that had haunted her department for 2 decades. "Every few years, someone asks me about the hikers who vanished in '99, Walsh told her partner, Detective Miguel Rodriguez, as they reviewed the case files. "Technology has advanced so much since then. Maybe it's time to take a fresh look with fresh eyes and fresh tools." The Mitchell Chen case had become something of a legend in law enforcement circles throughout Colorado. It was frequently cited in search and rescue training programs as an example of how people could simply vanish despite optimal search conditions and unlimited resources. The case had also inspired several academic studies on wilderness disappearances and search methodology. Rodriguez, who had transferred to Larimer County from Denver PD 3 years earlier, was unfamiliar with the details, but intrigued by the mystery. "What made this case so unusual? People get lost in the mountains all the time." "That's just it," Walsh explained, spreading crime scene photos and topographic maps across her desk. They weren't inexperienced tourists who got in over their heads. David Mitchell was a software engineer who programmed GPS systems for a living. Sarah Chen was a wildlife biologist who knew every trail in these mountains. They had top-quality gear, detailed plans, and years of hiking experience. The original investigation had been thorough and professional, but limited by the technology available in 1999. GPS units were expensive and uncommon among recreational hikers. Cell phone coverage was virtually non-existent in the wilderness, and satellite imagery was not readily available to search teams. In 1999, we were still doing search and rescue the same way we had for decades, Walsh continued. Ground teams, helicopters, maybe some basic radio communication. Now we have thermal imaging, drone surveys, satellite tracking, ground-penetrating radar, tools that could find evidence that was completely invisible to the original searchers. Walsh had been building a case for reopening the investigation for months, collecting information about technological advances that might be applicable to the old case. The turning point came when she learned about a new grant program that provided funding for cold case investigations using modern forensic technology. On April 8, 2019, Walsh received approval from Sheriff Tom Morrison, coincidentally the son of original search leader Jake Morrison, to conduct a limited reinvestigation of the Mitchell Chen disappearance. The new investigation would focus on areas that had been inaccessible or inadequately searched in 1999, using modern technology to examine the wilderness with unprecedented detail. "We're not going to solve this case by doing the same things that didn't work 20 years ago," Sheriff Morrison told Walsh during their planning meeting. "But we might find something that was always there, just waiting for the right technology to reveal it." The reinvestigation began with a comprehensive review of all existing evidence and witness statements. Walsh and Rodriguez interviewed surviving family members, former searchers, and anyone who had been involved in the original case. Many of the principals were now retired or deceased, but their institutional memory provided valuable insights. Robert Mitchell, now 78 and in declining health, met with the detectives at his Denver home on May 15, 2019. David's father had never stopped believing that his son and future daughter-in-law were still somewhere in the mountains, waiting to be found. "I've hiked every trail in that area dozens of times over the past 20 years, Robert told the detectives. "I know it sounds crazy, but I keep thinking I'll find something that everyone else missed. A piece of gear, a campsite, anything that would tell me what happened to them." Dr. Lisa Chen, Sarah's sister, had a different perspective. Now the chief of emergency medicine at Poudre Valley Hospital, she had spent years wondering whether her sister and David had encountered foul play rather than a wilderness accident. "Sarah knew how to survive in the mountains, Dr. Chen told Walsh during an interview on May 22, 2019. She could find water, build shelter, signal for help. If they had gotten lost or injured, she would have found a way to get them rescued. The fact that they disappeared so completely suggests something else happened." The detectives also interviewed surviving members of the original search team, many of whom had been haunted by their failure to find any trace of the couple. Former search leader Jake Morrison, now 67, and retired from search and rescue work, remained convinced that the couple's remains were somewhere in the wilderness. "In my experience, missing hikers are eventually found," Morrison told the detectives on June 3, 2019. "Maybe not right away, maybe not alive, but eventually someone stumbles across bones, gear, something. The fact that David and Sarah have never been found suggests they're in a location that's extremely remote or extremely well hidden." Walsh decided to approach the reinvestigation systematically, using modern mapping technology to identify areas that had received inadequate attention during the original search. High-resolution satellite imagery from Google Earth and government databases revealed numerous small valleys, cave systems, and geological features that were not visible on the topographic maps available in 1999. "The landscape looks completely different when you can see it from multiple angles and magnifications," Rodriguez observed as they studied satellite images on June 18, 2019. "There are dozens of places where a small campsite could be completely hidden from ground view or aerial reconnaissance." The detectives also consulted with current park rangers and search and rescue professionals about advances in wilderness search techniques. They learned about new technologies that could detect human remains underground, metal detection systems that could locate buried camping gear, and drone-mounted cameras that could access previously unreachable terrain. Ranger Patricia Stone, one of the few park employees still working who had been involved in the original search, provided valuable institutional memory about the specific challenges of searching the Mummy Range. "That area is a searcher's nightmare," Stone told the detectives during a meeting at park headquarters on July 10, 2019. "Deep cirques, hidden valleys, cliff bands that create blind spots from aerial observation. We always suspected there were areas we simply couldn't access with the technology available in 1999. Walsh began building a case for a limited physical search using modern technology. The new investigation would focus on a 5-square-mile area that included the couple's planned route and several adjacent drainages that had received minimal attention during the original search. The breakthrough came when Walsh learned about a new partnership between the National Park Service and the Colorado School of Mines to map underground cave systems using advanced ground-penetrating radar. The technology had been developed for mining applications, but was proving valuable for archaeological and forensic investigations. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a geology professor at CSM who specialized in limestone cave systems, agreed to examine the Mummy Range area for previously unknown caves or crevasses that could have trapped the missing hikers. "The geology of that area is perfect for hidden cave systems," Dr. Martinez explained to Walsh on August 14, 2019. "Limestone bedrock, glacial activity, underground water flow, all the factors that create extensive cave networks. Most of these caves have never been mapped or even discovered. The partnership with CSM provided the technological resources that had been unavailable during the original investigation. Ground-penetrating radar could detect voids underground that might contain human remains or camping equipment. Advanced metal detectors could locate buried gear that had been invisible to earlier searches." On September 23, 2019, exactly 20 years and 2 months after David and Sarah's disappearance, Walsh received authorization for a limited search operation using the new technology. The search would be conducted over a week-long period in early October before winter weather made the high country inaccessible. The modern search team included specialists from multiple agencies: National Park Service rangers, Larimer County deputies, Colorado School of Mines researchers, and volunteers from local search and rescue organizations. They were equipped with technology that would have seemed like science fiction to the original searchers. "We're going to examine this wilderness with a level of detail that's never been possible before," Walsh told the assembled team during their briefing on October 7, 2019. "Every cave, every crevasse, every hidden valley that could possibly contain evidence." The search began in the area around Hague Creek, where the couple had planned to establish their first campsite. Ground-penetrating radar revealed several previously unknown cave openings hidden beneath rockfalls and vegetation. Each potential site was carefully explored by technical rescue specialists equipped with advanced climbing gear and communication systems. The cave explorations were time-consuming and dangerous, but they revealed the extent of underground systems that had been completely unknown to the original searchers. Several caves extended hundreds of feet underground, creating vast spaces where camping gear or human remains could have been hidden for decades. "It's like discovering a whole new layer of the mountain," reported cave exploration specialist Tom Bradley on October 9, 2019. "These cave systems are extensive and interconnected. If someone fell into one of these, they could be miles from the surface opening by the time they hit bottom." However, the cave explorations found no evidence of David and Sarah. The underground spaces were pristine, showing no signs of human presence or disturbance. The searchers found evidence of animal activity: bear dens, pack rat nests, bat colonies, but nothing that could be linked to the missing hikers. Metal detection surveys were more promising. The team located several buried objects that had been missed by earlier searches: old camping gear, aluminum cans, even a few coins that had been dropped by previous visitors to the area. Each discovery had to be carefully excavated and examined to determine whether it could be connected to the Mitchell Chen case. On October 11, 2019, metal detection specialist Karen Murphy made a discovery that briefly raised hopes for a breakthrough. Her equipment detected a large metallic object buried beneath several feet of soil and rocks in a remote valley about 2 miles from the couple's planned route. "It's definitely man-made," Murphy reported over radio to the search base. "Size and shape are consistent with camping equipment, maybe a large backpack with frame, or even something like a camera case." Guido. The excavation of Murphy's discovery took most of the day, as the object was buried under rockfall that appeared to have occurred years earlier. When they finally reached the metallic source, however, it proved to be the remains of a weather monitoring station that had been installed by the National Weather Service in the 1980s and subsequently destroyed by lightning. "False alarm," Murphy reported with disappointment. "Just old scientific equipment that got buried by natural rockfall." The week-long search operation concluded on October 13, 2019, without discovering any evidence of David Mitchell and Sarah Chen. Despite using the most advanced search technology available, the modern team had been no more successful than their predecessors 20 years earlier. "It's incredibly frustrating," Walsh told Sheriff Morrison during their post-search debriefing. "We've now searched this area with 2 generations of technology, and we still have absolutely nothing to show for it." However, the modern search effort had produced one valuable result: a comprehensive mapping of previously unknown cave systems and geological features in the Mummy Range. This data would be valuable for future search and rescue operations and would contribute to scientific understanding of the area's geology. Dr. Martinez published her findings in the Journal of Cave and Karst Studies in March 2020, noting that the Mummy Range contained far more extensive underground systems than had been previously recognized. Her paper included recommendations for future wilderness searches in similar terrain. "Traditional search methods are inadequate in areas with complex underground geology," Martinez wrote. "Cave systems can extend for miles underground, creating spaces where evidence could remain hidden indefinitely." The failure of the 2019 search to produce results led Walsh to consider alternative theories about what might have happened to David and Sarah. She began investigating other disappearances in the Rocky Mountain region, looking for patterns that might suggest a common cause. Her research revealed a disturbing trend. Over the past 3 decades, at least 15 experienced hikers had vanished without a trace in Colorado's wilderness areas. Most were solo hikers, or small groups who had simply disappeared despite extensive search efforts. "We might be looking at this all wrong," Walsh told Rodriguez during a case review meeting on January 8, 2020. "Maybe David and Sarah weren't victims of a wilderness accident. Maybe they encountered something or someone that made them disappear." The possibility of foul play had been considered during the original investigation, but it had seemed unlikely given the remote location and the logistical challenges of concealing evidence in the wilderness. However, Walsh's research revealed that several of the other disappearances had occurred in similarly remote areas where criminal activity would be difficult to detect. One case in particular caught Walsh's attention: the 2003 disappearance of experienced mountaineer Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah, who had vanished while solo climbing in the nearby Rawa Wilderness. Like David and Sarah, Robert had been an experienced outdoorsman who had simply vanished without leaving any trace. "The pattern suggests that something systematic might be happening in our wilderness areas," Walsh wrote in a confidential report to Sheriff Morrison on February 14, 2020. Multiple experienced hikers disappearing completely, despite extensive search efforts, suggests a level of organization and planning that goes beyond simple criminal opportunism. Walsh's investigation into the broader pattern of wilderness disappearances was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down most non-essential law enforcement activities in March 2020. The Mitchell-Chen case was once again placed on inactive status as the department focused on immediate public safety concerns. During the pandemic lockdown, Walsh continued her research remotely, using online databases and digital archives to investigate similar cases across the western United States. What she found was even more troubling than she had initially suspected. A comprehensive analysis of missing persons reports from wilderness areas in Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and Montana revealed dozens of cases where experienced outdoors enthusiasts had vanished without explanation. The disappearances showed no obvious geographical pattern, but they shared common characteristics: experienced hikers, remote locations, complete absence of physical evidence. This isn't random, Walsh concluded in a report she submitted to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit on September 15, 2020. The scale and consistency of these disappearances suggests organized criminal activity, possibly involving multiple perpetrators operating across state lines. The FBI's response was cautious but interested. Special Agent Diana Foster, who specialized in serial crimes, agreed to review Walsh's research and provide federal assistance if warranted. Wilderness disappearances are challenging from an investigative standpoint, Foster told Walsh during a phone conference on October 22, 2020. Lack of witnesses, environmental factors that destroy evidence, and jurisdictional complications all work against successful prosecution. But if there's a pattern here, we need to identify it. Foster's involvement brought federal resources to the investigation, including access to national missing persons databases and behavioral analysis tools that were not available to local law enforcement. The FBI's preliminary analysis supported Walsh's theory that the disappearances might be connected. "We're seeing a statistical anomaly," Foster reported to Walsh on December 10, 2020. "The number of experienced hikers who have vanished without a trace in this region is significantly higher than would be expected based on historical accident rates." The federal investigation remained active, but low priority, as the pandemic continued to strain law enforcement resources throughout 2021 and 2022. Walsh periodically received updates from Foster, but no significant breakthroughs were reported. The case gained renewed attention in May 2023 when it was featured in a popular true crime podcast called Vanished in the Wilderness. The podcast brought national attention to David and Sarah's story and generated hundreds of tips from listeners across the country. Most of the tips were not useful, reported sightings of people who might have been the couple, theories about what might have happened, general speculation about wilderness survival. However, one tip caught Walsh's attention because of its specificity and detail. On June 15, 2023, a retired park ranger named William Hayes contacted Walsh with information about suspicious activity he had observed in the Mummy Range during the summer of 1999. "I was working in a different section of the park when the couple went missing," Hayes told Walsh during a phone interview. "But I remember seeing some unusual helicopter activity in that area around the time frame you're talking about. Military-style aircraft that weren't part of the search operation." Hayes described seeing unmarked helicopters flying low over the wilderness area on several occasions during July and August 1999. The aircraft didn't match any of the civilian or military helicopters that were normally seen in the park, and they seemed to be conducting systematic surveys of remote areas. "I reported it to my supervisor at the time, but we were told it was some kind of classified military training exercise," Hayes recalled. "We were instructed not to discuss it or include it in our daily reports." Walsh found Hayes's information intriguing, but difficult to verify. Military training exercises in national parks were not uncommon, and records from 1999 would be difficult to locate. However, the timing coincidence was notable enough to warrant further investigation. The breakthrough that would finally solve the 25-year-old mystery came from an unexpected source: climate change research. In March 2024, a team of glaciologists from the University of Colorado began a comprehensive survey of glacial recession in Rocky Mountain National Park, using advanced satellite imagery and drone reconnaissance to document changes in ice coverage over the past century. Dr. Amanda Roberts, the lead researcher on the Glacial Survey Project, was using high-resolution drone cameras to document the retreat of a small glacier in the upper reaches of the Mummy Range when she made a discovery that would finally answer the questions that had haunted investigators for 25 years. On the morning of July 18, 2024, exactly 25 years and 3 days after David Mitchell and Sarah Chen had disappeared, Dr. Roberts was piloting a research drone over a previously inaccessible cirque at 12,200 feet elevation when her camera captured something that made her immediately contact the authorities. "I need to speak to someone about the missing hikers from 1999, Dr. Roberts told the park dispatcher in an urgent phone call. "I think I've found their tent." The tent was located in a narrow, hidden valley that had been completely inaccessible to ground searchers and invisible from helicopter reconnaissance. It was situated beneath a cliff overhang that had protected it from the elements for a quarter-century, in an area that could only be seen from a very specific aerial angle using modern drone technology. What Dr. Roberts had discovered would not only solve the mystery of David and Sarah's disappearance, but would also reveal a truth far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The tent was not empty, and what was inside would finally explain why 2 experienced hikers had vanished without a trace, and why their disappearance was connected to a conspiracy that reached far beyond the Rocky Mountain wilderness. Detective Sarah Walsh received Dr. Amanda Roberts' call at 11:47 a.m. on July 18, 2024, while reviewing case files in her office at the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. After 25 years of dead ends and false leads, the words, "I think I've found their tent," sent adrenaline coursing through her system like electricity. "Dr. Roberts, I need you to stay exactly where you are and not approach the site," Walsh instructed, already reaching for her gear. "We're treating this as an active crime scene until we determine otherwise. Can you give me GPS coordinates?" The location Dr. Roberts provided was stunning in its remoteness. A narrow cirque at 12,200 feet elevation, tucked behind a cliff band that made it invisible from every angle except the precise aerial position where her research drone had been flying. It was approximately 3 miles from David and Sarah's planned route, in terrain so difficult that it had never been thoroughly searched during any of the rescue operations. Within 2 hours, Walsh and Detective Rodriguez were hiking up the treacherous approach to the site, accompanied by park rangers, a forensic team, and technical rescue specialists equipped with climbing gear necessary to access the hidden valley. The July afternoon was clear and warm at lower elevations, but they knew the high-altitude location would be cold and potentially dangerous. Dr. Roberts met the team at the base of the cliff band and guided them to a narrow chimney in the rock that provided the only feasible access to the cirque above. The climb required technical rope work and took over an hour, highlighting why the location had remained undiscovered for 25 years. "This place is completely invisible unless you're looking from exactly the right angle," Dr. Roberts explained as they ascended. "My drone was positioned to photograph glacial recession when it captured the tent. If I'd been 50 feet in any other direction, I would have missed it completely." When the team finally reached the hidden valley at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, Walsh found herself looking at one of the most remarkably preserved crime scenes she had ever encountered. The tent was a blue and orange dome-style shelter that had been protected from wind and precipitation by the rock overhang above. Despite 25 years of exposure to the elements, it appeared almost new. The microclimate here has been perfect for preservation, observed park geologist Dr. Mark Stevens, who had joined the team to assess the site conditions. Cold, dry, minimal UV exposure, protection from wind and precipitation. It's like a natural refrigerator. The tent was positioned on a flat area of the cirque floor, approximately 30 feet from a small tarn that would have provided fresh water. Scattered around the campsite were other pieces of hiking gear, backpacks, a camp stove, water bottles, and what appeared to be camera equipment. All were in remarkably good condition, considering their age. Walsh approached the tent carefully, noting that the zipper was closed, but not secured. She could see through the mesh window that there were objects inside, but the interior was too dim to make out details without artificial light. "Before we open this tent, I want photographs of everything from every angle," Walsh instructed the forensic photographer. "This site has been undisturbed for 25 years. We're only going to get one chance to document it properly." The photography and initial site documentation took over an hour. Every piece of visible gear was photographed in place before being collected for evidence. The team found hiking permits in one of the backpacks that confirmed this was indeed the campsite of David Mitchell and Sarah Chen. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Walsh finally approached the tent zipper. The moment she had been working toward for 5 years was at hand, but she felt a mixture of anticipation and dread about what she might discover inside. "Okay, I'm opening the tent," Walsh announced at 6:15 p.m. on July 18, 2024. "Everyone ready with cameras and documentation." The zipper opened smoothly, as if it had been closed yesterday rather than 25 years ago. Walsh directed her flashlight into the interior and immediately saw why Dr. Roberts had been so urgent in her phone call. There were 2 bodies inside the tent, but they were not the decomposed remains that would normally be expected after 25 years of exposure. Instead, David Mitchell and Sarah Chen appeared to be sleeping peacefully, their bodies preserved in remarkable condition by the unique environmental conditions of the high-altitude cirque. "My God," whispered Rodriguez, looking over Walsh's shoulder. "They look like they just lay down for a nap." The preservation was indeed extraordinary. The cold, dry conditions and lack of oxygen at 12,200 feet had essentially mummified the bodies, maintaining their physical features and even their clothing in pristine condition. David was lying on his back, while Sarah was curled on her side facing him, as if they had gone to sleep together. But as Walsh examined the scene more carefully, she noticed details that immediately contradicted the theory of a peaceful death from exposure or natural causes. Both David and Sarah were fully dressed in their hiking clothes, but their positions were too perfectly arranged to be natural. Their hands were positioned symmetrically, and their expressions were unnaturally serene. "This doesn't look right," Walsh observed. "People who die from hypothermia or exposure don't arrange themselves like this. These bodies have been positioned." More disturbing still was what Walsh found when she looked beyond the bodies themselves. Scattered around the interior of the tent were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be scientific equipment that clearly hadn't belonged to the couple. Dr. Roberts, who had been documenting the discovery with her own cameras, noticed something that made her step back from the tent opening. "Detective Walsh, look at this," Roberts said, pointing to a small device near Sarah's head. "That's a monitoring sensor of some kind. I use similar equipment in my glacial research." Walsh carefully lifted the device without disturbing the bodies. It was a small, electronic sensor with digital readouts and data storage capability, technology that was far more advanced than anything available to civilian hikers in 1999. "This equipment is definitely from the 2000s or later," observed the forensic technician who had experience with electronic evidence. "Whatever this is, it wasn't here when they died." As the team continued to document the tent's contents, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Mixed in with David and Sarah's personal belongings were items that clearly didn't belong to them. Military-style communication equipment, scientific monitoring devices, detailed topographic maps marked with coordinates and symbols, and most chilling of all, a thick folder of documents marked with classification stamps. Walsh carefully extracted the document folder, handling it with gloved hands to preserve any potential fingerprint evidence. The papers inside made her blood run cold as she read them by flashlight in the gathering dusk. "Rodriguez, we need to contact federal authorities immediately," Walsh said in a voice that had gone deadly serious. "This isn't just a missing persons case anymore. Idil." The documents revealed that David Mitchell and Sarah Chen had stumbled upon a classified military operation that was being conducted in the remote wilderness of Rocky Mountain National Park during the summer of 1999. The operation, codenamed High Country Survey, involved testing experimental surveillance and communication equipment in challenging mountain environments. According to the classified documents, the couple had encountered the operation site on their second day of hiking, July 17, 1999, when they had deviated from their planned route to investigate what they thought was an aircraft crash. Instead, they had discovered a temporary military installation that was conducting highly classified research. Test subjects, Mitchell, David, and Chen, Sarah encountered Survey Site Alpha at approximately 1400 hours on 17th of July 1999, read one document that appeared to be an incident report. Subjects observed classified equipment and personnel. Containment protocols initiated per Operation Security Guidelines. The containment protocols described in the documents were chilling in their clinical detachment. David and Sarah had been detained by military personnel, questioned about what they had seen, and ultimately classified as a security risk that required permanent containment. Subjects possessed technical expertise that makes standard cover story implausible, continued the incident report. Mitchell's background in GPS technology and Chen's wildlife biology credentials mean they would likely recognize discrepancies in official explanation of their encounter. Walsh found herself reading a detailed account of how two innocent hikers had been murdered by their own government to protect a classified operation. The documents described how the couple had been kept alive for several days while operatives decided what to do with them, and ultimately how they had been killed using an injection that would mimic death from exposure. Terminal containment achieved at 0630 hours on 20th of July 1999, read the final entry in the incident log. Subjects positioned at designated site to simulate wilderness fatality. All evidence of Survey Site Alpha removed per protocol. The designated site was the hidden cirque where Walsh now stood. According to the documents, the location had been chosen specifically because it was inaccessible to search teams and would preserve the bodies indefinitely, making the deaths appear to be the result of a hiking accident if they were ever discovered. But the plan had a critical flaw. The environmental conditions that were supposed to preserve the illusion of an accident had also preserved the evidence of murder. As Walsh continued reading through the classified documents, she discovered that Operation High Country Survey was part of a larger program that had been responsible for multiple civilian disappearances across the western United States during the 1990s and early 2000s. "We now know why there was a pattern of wilderness disappearances," Walsh told Rodriguez as they documented the evidence. "This wasn't random crime or serial killing. It was systematic elimination of civilians who accidentally encountered classified military operations." The documents listed dozens of incidents where hikers, climbers, and other outdoor enthusiasts had been contained after stumbling upon secret government activities in remote areas. Each case had been carefully staged to appear accidental, and the victims had been chosen specifically because they were solo travelers or small groups whose disappearances wouldn't generate extensive media attention. David and Sarah had been different. Their disappearance had generated massive search efforts and national media coverage, forcing the operation to adjust its protocols. According to the documents, Operation High Country Survey had been shut down permanently in 2001 due to excessive public attention on wilderness areas. Walsh found correspondence indicating that the operation's closure had been directly related to the Mitchell-Chen case and the unwanted scrutiny it had brought to remote wilderness areas where classified activities were being conducted. "The irony is devastating," Walsh observed as she read through the files. David and Sarah's disappearance was so high profile that it actually shut down the program that killed them. Their deaths saved other lives by exposing the operation. The evidence collection at the tent site continued until well after dark, with the team using portable lights to carefully document every piece of evidence. The bodies of David and Sarah were photographed extensively before being prepared for transport to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The preservation of the bodies was so complete that forensic examination would be able to determine exact cause of death and potentially identify the chemical agent that had been used to kill them. The documents suggested a synthetic compound that would metabolize to mimic the biochemical changes associated with death from exposure. As the team prepared to transport the evidence down from the cirque, Walsh made a discovery that provided the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden beneath one of the backpacks was a small digital recorder that contained David Mitchell's final message. The recording, dated July 19, 1999, captured David's voice speaking in urgent, frightened tones. "Sarah and I have been held by military personnel for 2 days after we accidentally discovered some kind of classified operation in the mountains. They say we saw something we weren't supposed to see. They keep telling us everything will be fine, but I don't believe them. If anyone finds this recording, know that we didn't die in an accident. Tell our families we love them." The recording cut off abruptly, but it provided irrefutable evidence that David and Sarah had been aware of their situation and had attempted to leave a record of what had happened to them. The descent from the cirque with the evidence and remains took most of the night, requiring multiple trips by the technical rescue team. By the time Walsh returned to her office at 6 a.m. on July 19, 2024, she was exhausted but grimly satisfied that the 25-year mystery had finally been solved. The federal implications of the case were immediately apparent. Within hours of Walsh's initial report, FBI agents arrived from Denver to take custody of the classified documents. By the end of the day, the case had been transferred to federal jurisdiction under national security protocols. Special Agent Diana Foster, who had been peripherally involved in Walsh's investigation for years, became the lead federal investigator. She confirmed that Operation High Country Survey had indeed existed, and that records of similar operations were classified at the highest levels of government. "This case represents a dark chapter in our nation's history," Foster told Walsh during a briefing on July 25, 2024. "Innocent civilians were murdered to protect government secrets. There will be accountability, but it's going to take time to unravel decades of classified operations." The families of David Mitchell and Sarah Chen were finally given the answers they had sought for 25 years, though the truth was more horrific than anyone had imagined. Robert Mitchell, now 83 and in poor health, broke down when Walsh personally delivered the news that his son had been murdered by the government he had served as a tax-paying citizen. "At least now we know," Robert said through tears during the family meeting on July 30, 2024. David and Sarah didn't suffer from exposure or accident. They were killed because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but they were brave enough to leave us a message so we would know the truth. Dr. Lisa Chen's reaction was anger rather than sadness. As a physician, she understood the implications of the synthetic agent that had been used to kill her sister and David. They were essentially executed with a chemical weapon, Dr. Chen told the assembled families and investigators. My sister was a biologist who dedicated her life to protecting wildlife and the environment. She was killed by the same government that employed her to do conservation work. The federal investigation into Operation High Country Survey and related programs continued throughout 2024, with congressional hearings scheduled for early 2025. Multiple government agencies were implicated, and documents released under court order revealed that similar operations had been conducted in wilderness areas across the western United States. The case became a landmark in government accountability and civilian rights. Legislation was introduced to prevent classified military operations in national parks and to provide compensation to families of civilians who had been killed in such operations. For Detective Sarah Walsh, the resolution of the Mitchell-Chen case represented the culmination of her career in law enforcement. She had spent 5 years pursuing a case that most people had given up on, and her persistence had finally brought justice to 2 innocent people who had been murdered for stumbling upon government secrets. This case taught me that truth has a way of surfacing, even after 25 years, Walsh reflected during a press conference on August 15, 2024. David and Sarah deserve better from their government, but they also deserve to have their story told. We owed them that much. The tent where David Mitchell and Sarah Chen had been found was preserved as evidence for the federal prosecution, but the hidden cirque became an unofficial memorial site for visitors who made the difficult climb to honor the couple's memory. A small plaque was installed near the tent site in September 2024, reading, "In memory of David Mitchell and Sarah Chen, who lost their lives in service of truth. Their courage in leaving a record of their final days ensured that justice would eventually prevail." The Rocky Mountains had indeed kept their secret for 25 years, but the mountains had also preserved the evidence needed to reveal the truth. In the end, the wilderness that had hidden the crime also provided the proof needed to solve it. David and Sarah's disappearance in 1999 had been the beginning of a quarter-century mystery. Their discovery in 2024 became the end of a government cover-up that had cost dozens of innocent lives. Sometimes the truth is buried so deep that it takes a generation to find it. But when it finally emerges, it illuminates not just the specific crime, but the broader darkness that made such crimes possible. The mountains remember everything. They just wait for the right moment to tell their stories.